When I got into the real estate industry back in 2005, I had about a 20% success rate on my cold calls, getting past that initial first 10 to 15 seconds. If you fast forward now 20 years later, that's more like a 90% success rate. Why? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to share with you in today's video. I'm going to walk you through the exact framework that I walk agents through, that I coach, so that you know exactly what to do, exactly what to say, and exactly how to get past that initial resistance. And so before we jump into today's video, if you at any time in the future want to have a conversation about a potential coaching relationship, you want me to give you direct feedback on your personal cold calls and your prospecting calls, simply click the link in the description. You can book a call when the time is right. All right, so let's talk about the first 10 seconds of the call. I think that this is where I think a lot of people, Ben, as you know, we listen to what seems like thousands and thousands of calls from agents that we coach. And it's either one of two things is happening. Either they're making a lot of calls and they just can't even get into the first question of whatever script that they're using, which is the biggest issue. And so we're going to unpack in this episode is how to turn that around. So let me explain it this way. So as people are cold calling, one of the biggest challenges that they have is, man, I get somebody on the phone and I can't even get past the first couple of words out of my mouth before the person's like, nope, let me just stop you right there. I'm not interested. Take me off your list. They hang up on you, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we're going to walk the audience through is kind of some of the things that we do when we coach an agent that is working about 90% of the time. What's funny about that is I made a video on the channel recently talking about the different openers, and people just got so caught up in like the metrics of it. Anyway, but my point is, if you can have a 90% success rate with inside of the first 10 seconds to give yourself an opportunity to generate a lead or a listing appointment via your cold calls, I think the entire mindset shifts around this activity, right? And so today's episode's not about the whether or not you should or what you're doing from a lead generation standpoint. This is for people that are already bought into the idea that, listen, I know that I have to call, I have to interrupt people, and I have to go out there and initiate conversations. It's how do I become the most efficient and effective while I'm doing that activity, right?
100%.
All right. So if we talk about the idea of how do I actually win the first 15 to 30 seconds call? Just they pick up the phone. I'm calling Nancy Jones. I get Nancy on the phone. Hello, this is Nancy. Like, what is the goal during that very, very valuable real estate, that very, very valuable time? So I wrote 3 things down, Ben, and I want to kind of get your thoughts too. But we know that when we make a sales call or when we make a cold call to a prospect, we are met almost 100% of the time with initial psychological reactance. That's just what we're met with. So the first goal is, how do we communicate such that we can lower that initial sales resistance? That is a really good skill to have. We're going to talk about that in a second. That's number 1. The goal number 2 I wrote down is to break the tension between salesperson and prospect immediately. What can we do from a technique standpoint that breaks that ice, that breaks that tension instantly? And then number 3, buys you some valuable time to get through that initial resistance that we talked about, such that you can have a meaningful conversation. Do you want to add anything when you're thinking about, or when you're coaching a salesperson or coaching a real estate agent and you're talking about, okay, the goal or the mindset of when that person picks up the phone, is there anything you want to add to that or expand on those 3 things?
Yeah, and I think we'll get into this when we get into breaking all 3 of those down, but I just always come into this thinking, I don't know where this person's at, what this person's doing at the moment I talk to them. And if they're carrying groceries or they're in the middle of a meeting, and whether that's true or not, because you hear those excuses, I just want to know what I'm doing. I believe it's going to work, or it does work 90% of the time, not every time, but that's the goal as I go into this, that I know it works. I don't know what they're doing, and I'm just going to go through my process, and we'll break down all of this, but go through my process, and then, the people that are just overreacting, I can let go and move on.
Yeah. Again, we have many episodes on like the mindset of cold calling, but I do want to mention before we get into the technique is that the call in which we're making it should be for the benefit of the prospect. So that's another just mindset, is that most people go into a call saying, what can I get out of this? And it causes all kinds of, head trash. It causes all kinds of mental barriers. And so prospecting is an act of service, right? Most people that are in real estate say to themselves, or they tell other people, I got into this business because I love helping people. Well, prospecting is a process of helping people. And I think a lot of people forget that. So it's an act of courage. You're willing to go out there, even though it makes you uncomfortable, reach out to people that didn't ask you to reach out to them as an act to serve them. And so we can never forget that. All right, so let's talk about the technique. So this all starts with the importance of using someone's first name. We call this a pattern interrupt, right? We're going to break down the technique of a pattern interrupt. Well, part of this pattern that we're referring to is everybody at some point in their adult life has received a telemarketing phone call at some point in their life. And that's the pattern in which we are trying to break, right? And so I think it's really important for the audience is let me help paint a picture, right? You're sitting at dinner with your family, and in your case, you got a bunch of kids, and you guys are, how difficult that is like trying to get everybody to eat, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get this call, and for some reason, you go and pick up the call, right? And it's like, hello, this is Ben, and it's a sales call. You almost want to throw the phone in that very moment through the window. It's like, but then there's like this human decency part of you, of just being a decent human being, where it's like, dude, it's just not a good time. Like that whole feeling, I think the audience can say, yeah, everyone's been there. So we're trying to break that pattern. That's what we're trying to do. Any thoughts just on that before we get into it?
No, that is perfect.
All right. So this is what your prospects are feeling, y'all. Like that's what they feel. When you call them, I know you are thinking of yourself as this high and mighty, real estate sales, god or goddess. They don't know you and they don't owe you anything. So this all starts with the use of their first name. And so if I'm calling a prospect and I've got, hopefully you've done your due diligence on the list of people that you're prospecting, and that's hopefully a highly targeted group of people. And you were to call a Nancy Jones as an example, and a woman answers the phone, I always just like to say, is that Nancy? That by itself, because to that person, their first name, their ears will perk when you use their first name. And we never, ever, 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 ever want to say, I'm looking for Mrs. Jones. Because the only people that do that is a telemarketer, right? It's a dead nuts giveaway. That language, remember, we're trying to break the pattern. So there's these psychological patterns. And so you hear me talk about this all the time, Ben. When I'm coaching agents, I say, you have a major, major, major responsibility on how people respond to you based on the language you decide to use. So a lot of agents will be like, man, these people are just so nasty, yada, yada. No, that's you pulling that out from them, right? It's like this mirror this mirror effect. So I say, is that Nancy? Now, Nancy automatically we've piqued curiosity, psychological curiosity, which is exactly what we want to do, right? It's exactly what we want to do. So we really want to say, we want to put this thought in the prospect's mind of who is this, right? They're trying to figure this thing out. They can't put their finger directly on what this call is. Oftentimes they'll say, yeah, who's calling, right? That's a good place to be. You get a nice question back.
Like, should I know you?
Yeah. Do I know this person? Who's this? And then we can use a little bit of disarming honesty. And this is where we're going to really spend some time on today's podcast, because I think this is so powerful. So most people, again, that make these types of phone calls, most real estate agents that are making sales calls or outbound prospecting calls or cold calls, they almost want to hide behind something. Whereas if they were to do the opposite and actually pull the pin or lay on their grenade or be a little bit more forthcoming or use a little disarming honesty, what you will find is that you will pull a lot of empathy from the prospect. Remember, prospects don't owe us anything, but if you can be the one who can speak to the thing that they're already feeling and you be the one that brings it up, you are going to pull so much empathy from the prospect. And so, Ben, let's get into what we mean by this, right? So can you just give some examples of what we're talking about when it comes to this disarming honesty and calling it out up front to what's going on here, and give us an example of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So it might sound like, hey, Brandon, if I told you I was a realtor, would you completely hate me and want to hang up the phone?
Yeah,
or would you give me 30 seconds to chat?
Yeah, I love it, right? So it's like, Nancy says, yes. Nancy, listen, I'm going to be up front. You know, if I were to tell you I was a real estate agent, would that completely ruin your Wednesday morning, right? Because the third thing on the list, and that they kind of go together in this technique, and don't worry, we'll give you guys some concrete examples, is to add a little bit of self-deprecation or a little bit of humor. And when this is done right, you will absolutely break the ice. You'll get prospects to laugh. You'll get prospects to really lighten up. You'll get prospects to say, wow, that's a different approach. Yes, I'll hear you out. And so this disarming honesty in combination of self-deprecating language or adding a little bit of humor will go such a long way, right? So there's multiple different ways to do this. So again, we call Nancy. Is that Nancy? Yeah, who's this? Nancy, this is Brandon. If I told you I was a real estate agent, would you want to throw the phone on the ground and just, would it just absolutely ruin your Wednesday? Would you get upset if I told you I was a real estate agent? There's many different scripts you can use, right? And it's less about the script. It's more about the approach. It's the approach of being so transparent about what's going on around the person's feeling that buys you the empathy that you're looking for. Listen, I know you probably hate getting calls like this. And I really thought, man, should I call you or not? Would it upset you if I asked for 30 seconds to tell you why I called before you hang up? Just doing something like that allows the person on the other end to sit there and say, you know what? I appreciate this approach to this person. It's very different. Yeah, you know what? Let me just hear them out. Right? And so, yeah, why don't we give them a couple concrete examples? We can maybe do some role play, unless you want to add anything to the framework of the technique, and then we'll give some concrete examples.
Yeah. So, I think maybe there's some people sitting there, Brandon, saying, what I say is not that different. I call and I say, hey, Brandon, this is Ben. I'm a real estate agent and I was calling about XYZ, right? I tell them I'm a real estate agent. Now, what I framework wise and technique wise want to double down on, because it's so important. What we're doing is we're saying something hypothetically. We're not saying that is what we are. We're saying, if I told you I was a realtor. And there's so much power in that. And that I just want to make sure people do not miss that key part. And we're also saying, would you hate me? Not, do you hate me? Right? All these kind of hypothetical things takes a lot of that power away and kind of almost makes us the conversation a third party, and we can get the facts we need to actually have the real conversation.
That's such a great point, because just going back to that little example of like what most agents, the approach or the script they use, that's the language that elicits that initial reactance, and it just pisses people off, right? Hey, this is so-and-so with Remax, and I was calling up. Nope. Let me just stop you right there. I'm not interested. I'm not selling. Just take me off your list, right? That's the problem with that, right? And so we have to just completely change the approach, right? So if I'm calling Ben, ring, ring, ring.
Hello.
Hey, is that Ben?
Yeah. Who's
Ben,
it?
Yeah, Ben. If this is Brandon, listen, if I told you I was a real estate agent, would that ruin your Monday morning, or would you give me just 30 seconds to tell you why I called?
Oh, that's good. You know what? Yeah, what do you got?
Yeah, that's exactly where we want to get, right? That's just an example. There are endless number of examples, right? There's so many different pattern interrupts that you can use, but that was a good role play. Like, you were a good prospect, because that's really what it sounds like. We listen to, again, hundreds of calls from agents every single week that we coach. And the ones that do it really well can get the chuckle. They can get the chuckle from the prospect to say, yeah, you know what, go ahead. And that allows, it doesn't matter if it's an expired listing, a for sale by owner, a circle prospecting call, an absentee owner call, a divorce lead, a probate. It doesn't matter around who that person is. That's irrelevant. We have to approach it in a way that, again, does it lower initial resistance? Does it break that initial tension where there's no conflict? Because most of the time when I listen to calls from agents that I don't coach, it's all conflict. I won't name names, but like people that come to me from other like gurus or coaches, they say, dude, I prospect, but it's like pulling teeth all the time. It's almost like an argument on every single phone call, right? Because every single script and what's being taught out there is to get into the buyer-seller, what I call tug of war. They say something, and then you try to come back and tell them, and it's just an argument, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back. So what we want to do is the exact opposite, right? In reverse selling, we want to give the perception that the prospect has all the control. And so from a psychological standpoint, there is no greater technique when it comes to influence than having the person feel as though they are in control. Because the opposite of that gets you into more of what you don't want, which is psychological reactance. And we know that psychological reactance is when somebody doesn't feel like they're in control, where they don't have the autonomy to make their own decisions, in that they're being pressured to do something that they may not want to do. That is how most sales scripts and approaches in our industry are designed. Would you agree with that?
1,000%. They want to get out as much as they can, as fast as they can before somebody yells at them or hangs up on them, right?
Yeah.
And it's like we really need to, I love this, slow down to speed up. And that's what we're doing. We're just taking a moment and we're slowing things down so that we can actually get where we want to go a lot faster.
And again, and then the other part of this is, like, I think that I often find myself, like, I've got a coaching call coming up here soon, that people forget which battle they're in. And what I mean by that is this: when they call a prospect, in their head, they're thinking about like this end result, this outcome of like getting a listing. I'm like, just really, really chunk this down. All my mindset is can I get the next 30 seconds? That's all I'm looking to win right now. These small, almost insignificant wins, these small micro commitments. If you really understand that as a sales professional, That's how you win big sales, is a series of small micro commitments over time that lead to a big commitment. But people have like this all or nothing mindset. It's like they want to call the prospect, and to your point, within the first 30 seconds, they want to try to win the listing. And it's like, dude, piss off. These scripts are insane. It's like, they're in no rapport whatsoever, and they're proposing within the first 30 seconds, and then they're confused as to why the person's rejecting them, right? And so the goal with the pattern interrupt at the beginning of a cold call is, can I communicate in such a way where I can get that 30 seconds? Because what you say next is really, really important. And we can cover that on next week's podcast, which is, okay, now that and we can give a couple more examples with this pattern interrupt. Now that the person says, you know what? Yeah, go ahead. What do you say next would be the next logical thing. But you've got to get that first before you can figure out, can I serve this person? And so again, when I go back to this pattern interrupt, we want to use the first name. So I call somebody. I'm looking for Bob, right? Bob, a man answers the phone. And I say, is that Bob? Bob says, yeah. Who's that? Bob, listen, this is Brandon. If I told you I was a real estate agent, would you hang up, or would you give me 30 seconds to tell you why I called? Or a lot of agents that we work with love you know what, Bob? This is Brandon. I'm a realtor. And listen, before you hang up, which I'm sure you probably want to do, can I tell you really quickly why I called? That's a lot of people's favorite. The point is, when it comes to language patterns and like what words to say and scripting that out, if we could just teach the audience that, Ben, I think that'd be a good win for today. And so when we go back to this disarming honesty, again, we want to use the person's first name. That will pique some curiosity. And then the next thing that you want to say is some type of laying on that grenade. So you want to call out what's really going on. Whether you say something like, listen, I know this call is super random, or listen, this is a complete cold call. I know you probably just hate getting calls like this. If I told you I was a real estate agent, would that piss you off? If I told you I was a real estate agent, would that ruin your Monday morning? If I told you a real estate agent, would you slam the phone down? Something like that, right? Where you're calling out the fact that you are, in fact, interrupting their day. You're not hiding behind it. You're calling that right out up front. And then after that, asking because that buys you this is the law of reciprocity. Because you've showed so much what I would call emotional courage, that's how you buy yourself some strategic empathy, Chris Voss calls it. That's actually how the purchase is made. Because my willingness, my emotional courage to come out there and be so vulnerable, to tell the prospect, listen, I don't know how you're going to feel about this call. It is super random. I'm hoping that I didn't ruin your Monday morning. And you're using that reactance actually to your benefit, because it's like, no. Like when you say something to somebody like, hey, I've got something to tell you, but I'm worried about how you might take it. Yeah. And how do you want to respond instantly to that, Ben? Just how would you respond to something like that instantaneously?
What's going on? Yeah.
Yeah.
How bad is it?
Yeah. But I'm worried that it's going to piss you off.
Oh, you can't piss me off. No.
Every time. That's what's going on. Now, Ben and I didn't have to script that. That's every human being. That's what's going on here. So when I say to the prospect, listen, Bob, I'll be up front. I'm a real estate agent. And, or Bob, I'm going to be up front. You're going to hate me. I'm a real estate agent. This is a cold call. Do you want to hang up, or will you just give me a quick 30 seconds to decide? When you do that, the prospects, no, go ahead. I want to hear you out.
Yeah, they argue the opposite, right?
They argue the opposite. That's exactly right. And so,
and you want to anchor high, like you're anchoring high or extreme so that they think whatever it is, it's not as extreme as that. Like, no, I don't hate you.
That's right.
So now it buys you a little bit of time to get into it.
Yep. So framework, name, some type of disarming honesty, some type of language that would be self-deprecating, that would go against you. It's for the benefit of the prospect. And then number 3, then you can make your ask after you've used some courageous, emotional courage, we'll call it.
Yep.
Is that
and
fair?
Part of number 2, I like to just, another way to think about it is whatever they're thinking, take that out of their mouth before they have a chance to say it. So you're laying on the grenade, but you're also just taking away all the power of what they have to say because you said it first.
That's right. I mean, that is exactly right. And that's going to get into next week's episode a little bit even more, which is how do I use language that is or what I would call rejection proof, in that you're actually feeding the prospect the objection and having the prospect deal with the objection.
That's right.
See, every other script, every other sales approach is the opposite. We're actually going to serve up the objection to the prospect, and we're going to stay out of it. We're going to have the prospect deal with all the objections. Again, and so that will be next week's episode. So we'll shoot that for the audience on Monday. That will be next Wednesday's release right here on the YouTube channel.